Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Bridge. So glad you're here today. My name is Vince. I'm the lead pastor here. So glad you decided to join us. Get up out of bed, make it to church. Give yourselves a round of applause. Come on. Yeah. We are starting a brand new series today called, say it with me, Moving Past Your Past. One more time, Moving Past Your Past. For the next 5 weeks, we're going to be talking about how Jesus wants to bring healing to the hurt and pain that you have experienced in your life. We all have a past and we all have pain. This series is going to focus less on our past mistakes, things we might feel guilty for that we did, although that's a great topic for another series. But this series is going to focus on the ways we've been wounded by other people. Everybody has pain from somebody in their life. Maybe a parent who treated you a certain way when you were growing up, or maybe as an adult. Maybe an ex-husband or ex-wife, ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend. Maybe your high school boyfriend or your high school girlfriend. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a coworker, maybe a relative, somebody who hurt you in some very significant ways. Or maybe for some of you, ways you were hurt that even feel less significant today, but you're still carrying some pain from something you experienced. This series is about how we find healing, wholeness, forgiveness, and move past our what? Move past our past, yes. To start out today, we're actually gonna do an activity. We've done this once in years past. We did it this morning, and it can be a very powerful, very helpful thing. One of the most important things to go forward on this healing journey that we're inviting you to take, one of the most important things is to know you're not alone. Somebody say you're not alone. So rather than share with you statistics about what different people out in the world have experienced in their past, we're actually going to do a survey right now with those of you here in this room about what we at the Bridge have experienced in our past. Before you fill out that survey, I want to warn you, the questions on it are very heavy. For some of you, they're going to be very overwhelming. They're going to bring up some painful stuff from your past, and part of that is the point. I want to say, first up, fill it out anonymously. Do not put your name on it. But to help you find courage to fill it out anonymously, I'm going to share my personal results from the same survey publicly. I'm going to share my answers for that survey that's sitting next to you. So I'm going to put every line up here on the screen. We're going to walk through it quickly. And the ones that you see a red check mark next to it, those are the ones that are true for my life, for your pastor. So I'm going to share my personal results, and then we'll ask you to share anonymously. First one, I was bullied as a child. That's a check mark for me. And you guys don't fill yours out yet. We'll have you fill it out in just a minute. I was neglected as a child. My parents rarely or never told me they loved me. My parents divorced when I was a child. I was physically abused as a child. I was sexually abused as a child. I've been painfully betrayed by a friend or family member. I've been seriously hurt by a religious leader. I've been through a divorce that was not my decision. I have been physically abused as a teen or adult. I've experienced a sexual assault or rape as a teen or adult. Someone did something bad to me that I've never told anyone. That would have been true for me for many years, but by the grace of God, through counseling and mentors and pastors in my life, I've gotten it all out in the open now. Sometimes I can't sleep or have nightmares because of my past. It's still true for me. I've struggled with addiction as a coping mechanism for my pain. I'm not struggling with those addictions anymore today by the grace of God, but for many years of my life, that was true for me. I've often felt alone in the pain of my past. I've thought about or attempted suicide at some point in my life. I've thought about killing myself in the last year, and I've struggled to know how to move past my past. So all those red check marks you just saw, those are the actual reality for me. And now I want to hand it over to you and ask you to fill out that same survey anonymously. You may hide it from the person sitting next to you. That's okay. If you need to spread out a little bit, that's okay as well. But I want to challenge and ask you to fill it out. We're not going to walk down the row and make sure you're filling it out, but there is such incredible power when we share these results later for the person who experienced that same thing to know they're not alone. If you keep your stuff a secret, don't even put it on the survey, then somebody else who marks yes at that point in their survey, they don't feel that connection, that solidarity that someone's been there as well. So I really want to challenge and ask you to fill it out. Again, totally anonymously, but we're going to give you 2 minutes on this timer right here to fill it out, and then we'll jump into the message. If that sounds good, say sounds good. Okay, 2 minutes, go ahead and fill it out, and then we'll carry on. All right, you can hand those all to your right. Pass them down the aisle that way to your right. If you're impressed that I'm pointing left for me while I say right for you, say I'm impressed. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that encouragement. It's like trying to, walk and chew gum at the same time. All right, so through this series, we're going to share with you a 5-stage process to move past your past. A 5-stage process to find healing. We're just going to do 1 stage a week. So today we're doing stage 1. Everybody say stage 1. We're going to preach this whole thing from the story of Jacob and Esau, 2 characters in the Bible. But I want you to know we could preach this from many different characters in the Bible because this 5-stage process is seen again and again and again and again. It's also stages that counselors and psychologists have discovered through other means as well. And it's also a 5-stage process I've walked through in my own life as well. Today we're just doing stage 1. Somebody say it one more time, stage 1. All right, so here we're going to jump into this story. And this story, there's a lot of kind of weird twists and turns in it, so stay with me. It's going to have a lot of power if you can keep tracking. The story we're going to look at today is a story, like I said, of Esau and Jacob. These are 2 brothers. Esau is a hunter. He's a manly man. He's got hair all over his body. That's actually one of the details that comes in later in the story. He's got a hairy chest, probably a hairy back. Kevin, our youth pastor, said you should say he's got a hairy butt. And I was like, I'm not going to say he's got a hairy butt, but I guess I just did. So anyway, he's a hairy man. He's a manly man. He's a hunter type dude. Then he's got a little brother named Jacob. Somebody say Jacob. Esau is the older one, Jacob is the younger one. Their parents are Isaac and Rebekah. In that culture at the time, the oldest son received a special blessing from the father. The closest thing that you might be familiar with to this would be like in medieval times or like knight days or kingships, or I guess in the UK, the lineage of a king down to the next king beneath the king or queen goes to the oldest child. You know what I'm talking about? The oldest child is first in line for the throne. Back at the time, that's actually how it worked just in every family, even if you weren't a king, that the oldest son had a special blessing, a special lineage, a special place in the family. So like I said, Esau is the older one, so he's in line for that blessing, and then Jacob is the younger one. First important part of this story is an interaction between Jacob and Esau right when Esau gets back from a hunting trip. He comes in probably all sweaty and manly and hairy and says, I need some food. Jacob, you've been sitting around at home. You made this pot of stew. Give me some of your stew. Give me some of your food. And Jacob says, Esau, I will give it to you. I'll give you some food if you give me your birthright. You give me the rights of the firstborn son, which is like a very crazy thing to ask for, and even crazier, Esau says yes. Now, we don't really know exactly why Esau says yes, but my gut is he kind of just laughed it off. Like he was like, sure, man, you can have my birthright. I know that I'm the oldest son, and I know just me telling you you can have my birthright is not going to change my dad's mind about who gets the blessing. I'm dad's favorite. I'm the oldest. Dad is going to bless me. I'm going to get the birthright, and I'm hungry enough to just say, you can have it. This comes back later, but this is the interaction they have at one point. Now we fast forward to the end of their dad, Isaac's life. He's laying on his deathbed. He's lost most of his vision, and the time has come for him to pass on the family blessing to his son, Esau. So Isaac calls Esau in, and he says, son, you're a great hunter. Go out, catch me some food. Cook me up a nice, tasty dish. I'm going to eat my final meal in this world, and then I'm going to bless you. And Esau says, great, Dad, I'm going to go do it. But who is listening in from behind the curtain? Who's that? Rebekah, the mother. And Jacob is kind of a mama's boy. Rebekah likes Jacob better than Esau, and so Rebekah says, I'm going to find a way for Isaac to bless Jacob rather than Esau. So she calls Jacob in, and she says, okay, Jacob, I want you to go out. Just grab an animal from the barn. Don't go hunting. Grab an animal from the barn, cook it up, and then place on yourself some kind of hairy coat or hairy garment to make your dad think that you are Esau. His eyes are fading. He's not going to be able to tell the difference. And then he will bless you thinking that you are Esau. And Jacob says, sounds good. So he goes in there, he brings the food that he just took from the animal that he killed in the barn, he gives it to his dad, and his dad, Isaac, is like, you feel like Esau, but you sound like Jacob. But Jacob convinces his dad that he is Esau, and then Isaac gives Jacob that oldest child blessing, even though Jacob is the younger son. Wouldn't you know, shortly after this, Esau rolls in with the food that he actually caught, killed, and prepared, and is there for his blessing. And Isaac goes, oh no, I blessed the wrong son. Isaac trembled violently and said, who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came and blessed him, and indeed he will be, what's that word? He will be blessed. When Esau heard this, when Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me too, my father. But he, Isaac, said, your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing. Now, this sounds a little weird to us, like, big deal, right? What does this even mean? Is dad prayed for the wrong son? Shouldn't he just be able to switch it over? And if he can't switch over the blessing, it's not going to make that much of a difference in his life. What I want to say a couple things to help you see the pain of this moment for Esau. One, if there wasn't any actual power in the blessing, that would still be a really lousy thing to do, wouldn't it? To pretend to be you so that your dad would love you instead of him back and forth, that's a messed up thing to do in general. But more than that, in that culture at the time, they believed there was actual spiritual power in the words. That even if Isaac had said the blessing to Jacob instead of Esau on accident or because he was deceived, that the power of the words would remain and that the blessing would still go to Jacob even though it meant to go to Esau. Now, to make this even more heavy and real for us, for whatever reason, at this point in history, and I can't exactly make sense of this, but God chose to honor that deceived blessing, that deceived dad. How many of you have heard the phrase in the Bible, Abraham, Isaac, and who? One more time, Abraham, Isaac, and? Yeah, so God gave a special promise to Isaac's dad, Abraham. And God said, Abraham, I'm going to make your family and your lineage into a great nation, and you're going to bless the entire world. That blessing of God did go down the lineage from Abraham to Isaac, son after son after son after son, all the way to Jesus. It went to King David first, but it ended in Jesus. So there actually was a spiritual blessing from God being handed down in this moment when Isaac blessed the wrong son. Meaning, if it was not for Jacob's deceit of Esau and Isaac, if it wasn't for him sneaking that blessing, we would all be saying throughout history, Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. Does that make sense? Rather than Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Meaning, in this moment, Esau's future really was ruined. The blessing that God was going to give to him was stripped away. It got stripped away in a weird way that I'm not saying can still happen to us today in the same way, but for whatever reason, that's what happened at this point in history. Esau would have been the chosen son to receive the spiritual blessing that would have carried on through his legacy all the way to Jesus and to us today. But instead, because he was deceived, all of that was robbed from him. This is an incredibly painful moment for Esau, incredibly damaging. What he's looked forward to his whole life, what he's hoped for his whole life was just robbed from him in one moment. And we're going to see over the future weeks, he is so angry, he actually tries at one point to kill his little brother. So this is a serious, heavy wound. And it is from this wound that we eventually see Esau heal from it, heal through it. Eventually, we see Esau move past this past moment, which will later be a past moment. But this is the moment of anger and rage and bitterness and heaviness and sadness for Esau. And also, this is the first stage of his healing journey. What we're about to see next is the first stage that eventually brings Esau to a place of forgiveness. And he does get to a place of forgiveness, of wholeness, all the bitterness released, flourishing in life. And it all begins in this next moment. What you're about to see is not going to seem that significant at first, but as we talk about it, you're going to see there's something in this for so many of you here today. Here's how Esau responds, and here's stage one. Esau said, in this moment where he realized his future's been robbed from him, Esau said, isn't he rightly named, what's that word? Jacob, which means deceiver, or somebody who grabs somebody else's heel. Isn't he rightly named deceiver? This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. He took my what? He took my birthright, and now he has taken my blessing. Seems simple, maybe even too simple at first, but hear this. In this moment, Esau is saying out loud, and most importantly to himself, that was wrong. Somebody say, that was wrong. Say it one more time. Say it like you mean it. That was wrong. I was wronged. I was taken advantage of. I was hurt by somebody who should have loved me. He is able to name that he has been hurt. Stage one of the process of moving past your past is to admit the what? Admit the truth that you were hurt. Admit the truth. I'm just saying to you for now. Admit the truth to yourself that you were wronged. Now, some of you that have experienced pain, abuse, trauma, betrayal in your life, you are very aware that you've been wronged. You are walking around with bitterness and rage and anger for some real things that have happened to you. And if that's you, you've already moved past stage one. But many people, when they're hurt, especially in childhood, but even throughout their entire lives, many people, when they have somebody wound them, have a very hard time, and this was me for a long time as well, have a very hard time just admitting the truth that they were wronged. Just admitting the truth to themselves that they've been wounded, just admitting the truth to themselves that they were taken advantage of. When we're in this moment, stay with me. When we're in this moment where something happens to us that somebody else does, here's what we do instead of admitting the truth. We tend to, what's that word? Normalize. That was normal back in the day. That was normal for parents to, hit their kids around a little bit, to beat their kids a little bit. That was normal. Yeah, maybe it wasn't great, and maybe I wouldn't do it to my kids, but it was normal at the time. That's just normal for guys in high school and college to push the physical boundaries further than I wanted them to go. That's just normal. That's just normal. If you go to a party and everybody's drunk, someone's going to try to take advantage of you. That's just normal. That's just normal for, a lot of pastors are bad dudes and they do bad things, and that's just normal that that pastor did that thing to me or said that thing to me or had that moral failure. That's just normal for, in-laws or, siblings to talk bad about you behind your back. That's just normal. And while it may be normal, sometimes we normalize instead of admitting the truth that we were wronged. If we don't normalize, sometimes we minimize. Well, it was wrong, but I've moved past it. My parents got divorced so long ago, it's not even really a part of my psyche anymore. We minimize the way it's impacted us. Yeah, my spouse cheated, my first spouse cheated, my second spouse cheated, but I've got a great marriage now, and so I've moved past that. It's no big deal. Yeah, my uncle did some weird stuff when I was young, but I hardly even knew what was going on. It's not affecting me today. We normalize, or sometimes we minimize. Or sometimes even we what? We apologize. We say, oh, it's kind of my fault. I shouldn't have drank so much. It's kind of my fault. I was a strong-willed kid. I don't think my parents could have done anything else. I was hardly spending any time with my husband, and he was so busy, and, I wasn't fulfilling some of the needs he wanted me to fulfill, and so it makes sense that he started to look at pornography, or it makes sense he went outside the marriage. Or if you're a guy, I was working a lot of hours, and so I kind of understand why my wife started talking to somebody else. We apologize, saying it's our fault for the way we were hurt by someone else. We normalize, we minimize, we apologize over and over and over again. Again, not all of us. Some of you are very aware of the way you've been hurt, but others of you have pushed that down and buried it beneath. And we do it, I get why we do it. We don't want to feel weird. We don't want to worry that it's still affecting us. And sometimes it even feels like the good Christian thing to do to apologize for something that wasn't your fault. Hear me say this. If you were hurt by someone else, if you were taken advantage of, and you've been normalizing, minimizing, or apologizing, you can't move past it if you don't admit it. You can't move past it if you don't admit it. If you don't admit the truth that you were wronged, you will carry that thing with you everywhere you go. There are so many of you here that are struggling with addictions, struggling with depression, struggling with relationship issues. Some of you, before you got married, you couldn't stop having sex. Now that you're married, you never want to have sex. There's dysfunction in your sexuality, dysfunction sometimes in your financial behaviors, and there is a one-to-one connection with what you experienced as a child or teen or young adult or in your last marriage. The trauma of your life is affecting you today, and you just keep telling yourself, no, it's normal, it's not a big deal, it was my fault, and I'm just going to ignore it. You can't move past it if you don't admit it. My hope of this series, and God's hope for you in your life, is not to keep you buried in those memories. I know you're terrified to go look at them. The point is not to stay connected to those memories and let them haunt you. But what I'm saying is, for you to fully move on and forgive, you have to admit that something bad happened. Normalizing is not forgiving. Normalizing is not healing. Normalizing isn't even moving past your past, it's just stuffing down your past. Minimizing, saying it wasn't that big of a deal, that's not forgiving the person. The hope is that you forgive. The hope is that you do heal. But minimizing keeps you from healing. And apologizing, same thing. Apologizing is not the same thing as forgiving. Apologizing is not the same thing as healing. Some of what happened to you may have been partially your fault. I don't know your story. Let me take this moment right now to say, if what happened to you, or one of the things that happened to you when you were a kid, that was not your fault. That was not your fault. There is no child who deserves to be taken advantage of by an older child or by an adult or by anyone. It doesn't matter what kind of child you were. That was not your fault at all. You might have done other things wrong as a child. I think we can sin as children, but it was not your sin that made you deserve what happened to you. But maybe something happened to you as an adult, and part of it was your fault. I don't know the situation. But what I do know, even if it was part of it was your fault, if you just apologize for your part and stuff down what that other person did to you, you haven't moved past it. You can't move past it if you don't admit it. You've got to just admit the truth. That's how it begins. You admit the truth that you were wronged. Why do we do this? Why do we stuff it down? Why do we so desperately not want to admit that there's pain in our lives? I think if you're anything like me, because I did this for years and I probably still do this in some ways without even realizing, but we're terrified to know how deep it goes. We're terrified to find out how deep that wound actually goes inside us. You know, in like war movies or Marvel movies or any kind of movie where they're like shooting at each other, and the main character, the good guy, gets shot, right? One of the good characters gets shot in the side or something, and you see that guy holding that wound or that girl holding that wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Have you ever noticed the person who's been shot never actually is the one who checks to see how bad the wound is? It's always somebody else who comes over and pulls their hand off or pulls the jacket off and looks at the wound and says, "Oh, that's bad," or "You're going to be fine," or "Just keep pressure on it," or, whatever. It's never the person who looks. And I think a lot of the reason it's never the person who is wounded who actually looks at the wound, and they'll even say this in some of the movies, is like they don't want to know. They don't want to know how deep that bullet hole goes because they don't want to find out it's fatal. Or they don't want to find out they're too far from the medic, or they don't want to find out it's going to lead to long-term paralysis. The person who's wounded never wants to look at the wound. Why? Because they're terrified to know how deep it goes. It's the same thing for me and you. If you've been hurt, if you've been wounded, if someone took advantage of you, oftentimes we normalize and we minimize and we apologize because we don't want to admit that we're hurt and then not be able to deal with that hurt. So you remember at the beginning, one of the boxes I had checked for me personally was that I was sexually abused as a child. There's a spectrum to sexual abuse. And even after counseling, hear me say, I'm not minimizing when I say on that spectrum, I was on the less extreme end. All sexual abuse is horrible and wrong, but there are many people who were sexually abused that it was much more serious. And I think because it was on that less extreme end of the spectrum, it was that much easier for me to minimize it, to push it out of my head. Oh, that didn't really affect me. That was weird. That was wrong. And that kind of really makes me feel sick to my stomach today. I don't want to tell anybody about that. I would never want anybody to know, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. That was me for years and years and years and years. And the family member that did what happened to me, did that thing, that family member was and still is a part of my life, which I think was a piece of the puzzle as well. But I started going to counseling for something totally unrelated, and it kind of came out in the counseling. The counselor was just digging and asking about my childhood, and I said, well, there was this thing that happened a bunch when I was little, but I don't really think it was that big of a deal. And I'll never forget the counselor looked at me and said, that's sexual abuse. And I literally said, no, it's not. That's not really. And she was like, if I was your counselor when you were a kid, like if you were getting counseling as a kid and you told me that when you were young, I would be legally required to tell Child Protective Services and your parents would have lost custody. And it was like, in that moment, my whole world turned upside down. And I realized I had been terrified to know how deep that wound went. And I realized in that moment, I was terrified for a good reason, because it totally messed me up for a season. I had a total identity crisis. Like, I had, not even realizing it, but I had judged people that experienced sexual abuse, not like it was their fault, but like, they're damaged goods and they're gonna have all sorts of issues, and I'm so glad that nothing like that ever happened to me. And now I'm like, wait a minute, something like that did happen to me. And that's probably affected me in countless ways. And I could even start to put together some of the pieces of ways that it affected me. So it was a total identity crisis. And then not only that, I was filled with a rage that had been there all along, but now was finally coming to the surface for that person who was doing that thing to me when I was young. And not only that, like I said, that person was and still is in my life. And I was like, what am I supposed to do now with this relationship dynamic? How am I supposed to treat them when I see them? And it was gonna mess up, oftentimes with our families, we have kind of a carefully balanced relationship system. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. It's like one thing gets going wrong and the whole thing falls apart. I was like, this is gonna cause the entire family system to fall apart if anything, comes out with this whole thing. For so many of you here in this room, that's what's going on. There's stuff that happened to you that you've been pushing down, burying, normalizing, minimizing, apologizing for because you are terrified of the identity crisis it's gonna bring if you admit it. You're terrified of the ways it's gonna mess up relationships if you admit the truth of the ways that you were wounded. You're terrified you're not gonna know the steps you need to take in order to find healing from that thing. I get it. But let me tell you, I am so grateful to God that I eventually admitted the truth. I am so incredibly glad that God brought it to the surface, even though it was real painful and messy in the moment and then real painful for many years after that. But I'm telling you, I would not have the marriage I have today if I hadn't worked through that. I would not have the relationships with friends that I have today if I hadn't worked through that. I might not be the pastor of this church if I had not gone through that healing process. There are so many of you who are wrestling with so many issues because you just keep pushing that thing down. And God wants you to begin the journey of admitting the truth today. Of just saying that was wrong. 3 quick mental exercises to take you through to help you be able to see this for yourself. It's very hard to see it in the mirror. It's very hard to see what was right or wrong about a childhood because it was all your childhood or all your teenage years or all your first marriage, and whatever your life is often feels normal until you see it through someone else's eyes. So 3 tests right now real quick to put through in your mind. I want you to think of that thing that you feel like you might not be fully in reality about. Something that's caused you pain, or maybe something that you're like, I think that should cause me pain, but I haven't really felt anything about it. Hold that thing in your mind. Hold that event in your mind. I know it's hard and painful to let it come to the surface, but just hold it in your mind for a minute. And I want you to push it through the friend test. Meaning, I want you to imagine that one of your friends that you love came to you and didn't know your story, didn't know your pain, but shared with you and said, hey, this thing happened to me at some point in my life, or childhood or teenage years or adulthood. And they shared with you that they experienced the very same thing that you've been thinking of that you experienced. Meaning, what would you tell a friend who went through that same thing? Would you say, that's normal? Would you say, that's no big deal, just forget about it? Would you say, that was mostly your fault? Because if you wouldn't say it to a friend, but you're saying it to yourself, something's wrong. Because you have the same value as that friend. Second test is the child test. This is especially for something you experienced as a child. Our childhood is the hardest part of our lives to see clearly. So I want you to let come to the surface that thing that happened to you as a child. And I want you to imagine a child that you love, maybe your own child, maybe a friend's child, maybe a little niece or nephew or cousin. And I want you to imagine that little kid coming to you and sharing with you that what happened to you as a child has been happening to them. Would you say to that kid, listen, that's normal? Would you say to that kid, just don't worry about it, just let it go? Would you say to that kid, honestly, that's your fault, buddy? If you would be distraught or bothered or do whatever it takes to help that child avoid what happened to you, but you've been normalizing, minimizing, and apologizing for your own childhood, something is wrong in the way that you see yourself. When you were a child and who you are today has the same value as that child that you're imagining. And then lastly, and for some of you, this is going to be the most painful one, but it's the you test. Meaning, I want you to imagine, again, that thing that was done to you. I want you to imagine, if you've been normalizing, minimizing, or apologizing, I want you to imagine that tomorrow you went out and did that thing to somebody else. How would you feel about yourself? Would you say, well, that's normal, I did that? Would you minimize it and say, oh, it's no big deal that I just did that to someone else? Would you say, they should really apologize because it was really their fault? If you would feel like, that was so wrong, I just did that. That was so bad, I just did that. I can't believe I just did that. But then you've been making excuses for the person who did it to you, something is wrong. And your healing journey has to begin with you just saying, that was wrong. And admitting the truth for today, just to yourself. If it was wrong for someone else to experience, it was wrong for you to experience. Here's what I want to remind you, or maybe for some of you to hear for the first time. But you were created in the image of God. God has given worth and value to every person, regardless of anything that they've ever done. And it is always wrong to mistreat a child of God that He created, no matter who they are. It was wrong what happened to you, not because you're such an amazing person, although you are an amazing person, but it was wrong what was happening to you because God has given you value, because He created you. God says you're worth something. God says you matter to Him. And your value to God was enough that He sacrificed His own Son so you could be saved. You're not someone who deserves to be hurt. You're not someone who deserves to be kicked around. You're not someone who deserves to be betrayed and abused. You are someone who God says, you are worthy of the sacrifice of my own Son. You are worthy of the crown of thorns being pressed into His skull. You are worthy of nails going through my Son's hands. You are worthy of my Son spending hours in agony on a wooden cross so that you could be saved. You are worthy of my Son spending 3 days in the tomb. There is no one here who deserves for another person to treat them the way you've been treated. You are a child of God, made in His image, loved by Him. And if someone has hurt or abused or mistreated or betrayed you, whatever, that was wrong in the eyes of God. Amen? Last thing we're going to do today, and I hope this is maybe the final step that it takes for you to be able to admit the truth, that you were hurt. And that final step is just to know you're not alone. You're not alone. You're not the only person who experienced these things. So I'm going to ask now the ushers to come forward, and you're going to be handed back somebody else's survey that was filled out today. Most of them are from this service. A couple might be from first service, but we can get the house lights up, and you're going to be handed somebody else's survey. And in just a minute, I'm going to ask you to do something that we call stand up for your siblings. Like I said, there's something powerful about knowing people out in the world have suffered things like you, but I want you to know that the people right here beside you in this room, the people who call this church their home and their family, they've experienced those same things as you as well. That you're not damaged goods beyond repair. That you're not the one person who's got pain in their past. That you're not beyond any of the other people in this room. So I'm going to let the ushers hand those out. It'll take just a couple minutes. Hang in there and be patient. They got to kind of count them by the rows and make sure everybody gets one. But in just a minute, we'll go through this activity. And for some of you, this is going to be real help for your life. Chris, can you give me a thumbs up when you guys are ready? Almost there, y'all. Doing a great job hanging in there. I want to make sure everybody gets one. We got a hand up over here. I believe that's basically everyone. What we're going to do now is I'm going to read each of those items again. And then if on the survey you're holding in your hands, someone else's survey, if the box is checked, go ahead and stand up. Not yet. I'll put them up in a minute. But as we go, you'll stand up, not based on what's true for you, but what's based on that survey, which is true for somebody in this church. And again, the power of this is knowing you're not the only one. When I go to the next question, and I'll lead us through it. When I go to the next question, if that box is checked, you can just stay standing. If it's not checked, you can go back and have a seat. Make sense? If you're ready, say, I'm ready. All right, here we go. First one. I was bullied as a child. Go ahead and stand up if that's you. Look around the room. I know so many of you have thought I was the only one. I was the loser. I was the dumb kid. I was the only one. But you're not alone. Can we all say it together? You're not alone. Second one. I was neglected as a child. Sit down if that's not checked. Go ahead and stand up if that is checked. Look around the room. Let's say it again. All together. You're not alone. Yep. My parents rarely or never told me they loved me. Stand up if that's you. Sit down if it's not checked. Look, even more than the last one. All together one more time. My parents divorced when I was a child. That pain that you've been carrying, a lot of other people have carried that same pain as well. All together. I was physically abused as a child. Sit down if that's not checked. Stand up if that is checked. This is our family, guys. This is us. All together. I was sexually abused as a child. Sit down if that's not checked. Go ahead and stand up if that is checked. We think it's so rare. We think it's so taboo. We think it's so unheard of. Look around the room. All together again. I've been painfully betrayed by a friend or family member. Sit down if that's not checked. Go ahead and stand up. Wow, nearly every single one of us. Let's say it again. I've been seriously hurt by a religious leader. And on behalf of pastors, if I could be so bold, I want to say I'm so sorry. All together. I've been through a divorce that was not my decision. So many of us. All together again. I have been physically abused as a teen or adult. Sit down if that's not checked. Go ahead and stand if it is. It doesn't always stop in childhood. Sometimes it continues on for so many of us. One more time, all together. I've experienced a sexual assault or rape as a teen or adult. Again, sit down if that's not checked. Go ahead and stand if it is. So many of us, all together. Someone did something bad to me that I've never told anyone. Sit if that's not checked. Stand if it is. Again, all together. Sometimes I can't sleep or have nightmares because of my past. Look at that. Look around. We've all got stuff, everyone. Say it one more time. I've struggled with addiction as a coping mechanism for my pain. Sit if that's not you, stand if it is. The majority of us, I always tell people, all of the bridge is in recovery or needs to be. All together say it. I've often felt alone in the pain of my past. Stand if that's checked, sit if it's not. Look at that. We've all felt alone, and we've all been there. All together. I've thought about or attempted suicide at some point in my life. So many of us. Look at that. Look around the room. Say it again. I've thought about killing myself in the last year. Still so many of us. Say it together. I've struggled to know how to move past my past. Dan, if that's you. Say it again. Say it like you mean it. Say it to bring some hope. Say it with the love of the Lord. You're not alone. You're not alone. We are in this together, and God is with us. Amen? Amen. All right, let's all stand. I'm gonna pray us out. God, I thank you for the love that you have for the people in this room. And God, I thank you that you are a God of healing. And deliverance and wholeness and life. And I pray that you would bring new life to these people. I pray that they would know your love like they never have before. That they would find wholeness and peace in you and be able to take that pain and discover that you have a purpose for them to help somebody else going through the same thing. So repeat after me. Say, thank you, Jesus, that you are with me. Thank you, Jesus, that you love me. Thank you, Jesus, that you suffered for me. All right, prayer team, come on down. I really want to just beg you guys to come forward for prayer as the service ends. Prayer team, come forward. Don't rush out to lunch. Receive some prayer. Get in line behind somebody. We might have lines for a while. That's totally fine. Receive some prayer. You don't have to share all the junk, all the past with the person up here. You can just say, I need some prayer, or you can share something if you want to share something. Some of you need to share with your life group this week. Some of you need to start counseling. We're going to talk about all those action steps as we go. But as we end, if you need prayer, you can come forward for prayer. You can also fill out a prayer request on that little card. If you're new, we'd love to meet you in the 5-minute meetup. And I want to challenge and encourage you to come back next week for stage 2 of moving past your past. God, I ask you to bless these people, bless their weeks, and draw near to them this week. In Jesus' name, everybody said, I love you all. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.